So I think there is something to be done. I mean, yes, there is collective action in policy and so on, but there's also individual choice and people leading by example in their own workplace with their own friends. I also think that there are differences in, you know, I've noticed this particular Slow Down London campaign took off in the media, and several people said to me, you know, it's partly because journalists are so stressed out that they really relate to this. And certainly all the journalists I met while doing the story were absolutely manic, and we were talking about the fact that certain kinds of professions are very speedy professions, and they live on adrenaline and buzz, and they can tend to attract people who are like that naturally, and so they kind of almost get into this vicious cycle of speed, so that even when they leave work at the end of the day, they can't get off that. They still want to kind of keep going and keep going. And I think there are a lot of types of jobs in London that are like that.
I wanted to ask the question about conversation. I was very lucky when I met my wife that she basically said the only thing I'm interested in is whether or not we get a conversation. And at that time I thought this was kind of nuts. And gradually I realised that actually this making time to actually have the conversation was the thing. She taught me to make sure that the conversation didn't be with, not just with her, but with friends, with colleagues. It wasn't the thing you were going to have one day when you got round to it and then you died. Because I certainly see, also working in a lot of very arts organisations all over the world, exactly what you're talking about. Lots of people who should be creative, should be, if you like, holding the aegis of creativity up, and they're not. They are never taking time to do a kind of in Sinclair walk and have a conversation about something else while they're doing it. And I want to bring up this thing, which I do have to say, the phenomenon which everyone must have seen of friends. I admit it, I don't have a mobile phone, I don't know how to use a mobile phone, I'm sorry. People who meet with their friends, it's not a principle, I'm just useless. They meet with their friends, and I've seen it happen, immediately start texting somebody else, and this is kind of truly abstracted life going on. That is interesting to me.
I was brought up in a sort of Protestant work ethic. And not being the first at work and sort of not constantly being busy made me always feel guilty. So I always worked through the lunch hour and so thought somebody should pat me on the shoulder for that. Until I realized that I was actually far less effective. And my teams, and I've got a volunteer in the audience who works with me, knows that I make absolutely sure they take their breaks. A, because it's good to be away from work for a little while, and B, because we need that kind of break to just recharge. And those people who are constantly working around the clock are often the least efficient ones.
I was thinking about time, as obviously we're all thinking about time right now, and it strikes me that some of it might be perception. For instance, I have my iPod. I'm as guilty as all the iPod users. And I find it extremely helpful to kind of, you know, help me to think about, reflect about my day, or take me away from the noise from the tube and other people talking. I find it extremely helpful, and maybe a bit of a me time. Also, perception that maybe 8 hours of work might be good for one person. Some may need 12 hours at work to get the work done, and they're happy, and they go home, they feel they've achieved, and they're fine with it. Some people may find that they go home and they need to go for a run to relax. So I find that a lot of it is perception.
The effect on one's sense of time, on being told that one is terminally ill, is that the question? I can't respond directly to it, but something that comes close, which I think is worth sharing. Most of you, I certainly have had experience where there have been times when you weren't certain about, it's not that you were told that someone you know or you love is going to die after 2 months or 6 years or whatever it might be, but where there's a degree of uncertainty. And you will know, if you've been through this experience, that there's an extraordinary, it has an extraordinary sort of trajectory. There's a moment when everything, the world seems totally different from how you've recalled it. That moment may be extended over a period of weeks. It's never quite as bad the subsequent moments, they're never quite as bad as that first moment of realizing, or first moment of having your complacency or your confidence in the future, as it were, initially shaken. But you revert when you're told, you know, if you're lucky and you're told that the panic is off. Do you actually then reconstruct your life as you were telling yourself for a while you would? No, you don't. And you sometimes catch yourself wondering why you didn't. You revert back to the same old patterns that you were in before.
To the previous question about how terminal illness affects your experience of time, I'm referring to is a Macmillan nurse who said that people in that situation, in her experience, tend to value three things. They're concerned with three things: the people they love, the people who love them, and the people they've hurt. And it seems to me that if that's actually what is important then, it's probably what's important the rest of the time. And we could learn from that in advance. But in a sense, I wanted to ask a different question about the cause of the speed and the pace at which we live, and whether, to a certain extent, it's the standard of living that we've got used to that is the cause of it. We have got used to a standard of living our grandparents would never have dreamed of in terms of foreign holidays and or technology and all sorts of things, with the result that employers can't afford to employ as many people as they would have done in our grandparents' day. So the people who are left, who are employed, are having to do, there are fewer of them to do the job that was being done by more people. And therefore, our standard of living is in inverse proportion to our quality of life.
It's a very good point, and it's one that came up. The BBC did a global phone-in on slowing down, sort of sparked by the Slow Down London campaign, and that was the theme that came up from people in a lot of cities around the globe, saying it's about wanting more and more. It's the material culture that's driving us. So I think it's a really helpful observation.
It doesn't seem that today's world is moving, or it's not sort of parallel to our own body clock. Recently, if you don't drink and you don't smoke and you don't have other sorts of fun, you may think that you're living longer, but that's wrong. It just feels a lot longer. And that to some extent, is the point. You know, I'm to some extent, well, not to some extent, I am a medievalist. And I think a lot about the Middle Ages and people in the Middle Ages. And there's a lovely example of Jean Fuseli, you know Jean Fuseli, the musician, astronomer, who was once imprisoned and asked what his age was. And when he was first imprisoned, he said it was around 50. And then a few weeks later, he was imprisoned and was asked, and he said it was about 60. Now, you can say about probably what the person from imprisonment did to that poor man. But the point I'm trying to make here is, he didn't know what his birthday was. Nobody did at the time, because that didn't matter. What mattered was the saint's day or other markers in time. Now, we all do. We have a greater grasp of that. Is that a positive thing that we know when we reach 30 or 40 or, God forbid, 50? So we're so obsessed with that rather than living longer or enjoying it, we're actually spoiling a lot of that time. Back to the body clock, the point I was trying to make with the ages, if we didn't know our age, would that mean that we would feel younger? We always say one's as old as one feels. So if we didn't know how old we are and would desperately try to revert that process, most people, would that empower us?